Aragorn let the silence hang, not wishing to press the other. He moved stiffly, trying to get more comfortable. The jarring to his legs sent a wave of pain through him, and he drew his breath in sharply, trying to deal with the sudden onslaught. Legolas leapt to his feet and rounded the fire. He knelt next to the ranger and gently moved his leg to a more comfortable position, making sure that the bandage was secure and the wound had not reopened. Aragorn let him have his way while he worked on dealing with the pain. When the elf was done, he laid the cloak back down over the ranger's leg. Aragorn reached out and touched the prince's hand. Legolas instinctively jerked away, looking up into the questioning dark eyes that watched him. "You said your name was Legolas?" The elf watched him, almost not breathing. "Legolas Greenleaf. Are you Thranduil's son?" He nodded slightly. "My father has told me of you. Now I understand a little better. I heard that something happened to you in Dorolyn." The young ranger's voice was quiet. Perhaps with more age and wisdom he would have found a little more tact in addressing the situation. But his intentions were good, and his words earnest. Legolas did not move. It was odd and uncomfortable for a moment, finding out that Aragorn knew something about what had happened to him. He did not like others knowing of the pain and his shame. How could this young man, who in the elf's mind had barely been weaned, possibly understand what he was talking about when he spoke of the evils of Dorolyn, now gone for many centuries? Aragorn watched as the shadow passed over the grey eyes that held his own. He could see the elf close in on himself. He had heard the stories of bravery about the son of Thranduil, and had always wanted to meet him some day. For this to be that very person was exciting to him, but he could tell that for the elf it must have caused him nothing but pain. The realization that they might never be friends because of man's inhumanity to all that wasn't man made him sick. "Please, I meant no disrespect. You are greatly honored in the halls of Rivendell. It is my privilege to meet you, Prince of Mirkwood." Legolas looked off into the woods behind him. He wasn't sure what to say. He had thought the horrors of Dorolyn and his own fears were long laid to rest. For the most part, he had not associated with men. Since his time in Dorolyn, he had stayed close to his father's realms and honed his hunting and warring skills. His accuracy with a bow was now almost legendary. Aragorn was the first man he had encountered in a few centuries, and definitely the only one he'd had such close, prolonged contact with. It had not ever occurred to him that the tales of his time in Dorolyn were ever spoken outside his own kingdom, for rarely was it spoken of there. Aragorn sighed. He had decided that Legolas's silence was a rejection of himself as a man. He knew he should expect it from other men, especially those of Gondor, and even from some of the elves themselves, but he had hoped. "I took no offense at your words, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur." The elf smiled sadly at the surprise on the ranger's face. "Yes, I have heard of you also. Your own legend precedes you." Aragorn watched him questioningly, wondering how a strange elf had come to know about him what he himself had only recently found out. "You spoke in your dreams last night." Legolas explained his knowledge of the man's origin. "Your wounds became infected, and you were feverish." The ranger nodded in understanding, wondering what else he had said. "I was not, however, aware that you had decided to follow the footsteps of the Dunedain," Legolas continued. Even if he had known of Aragorn before hearing the delirious words last night, he had heard something about Estelle, the young human that Lord Elrond had curiously decided to take under his wing some years ago. "Well then, I guess there is a lot we both don't know about one another." Aragorn laughed at the awkwardness the conversation had instilled. "Let me try this again." He smiled at the elf and cleared his throat. Then, extending his hand, he introduced himself. "Hello, my name is Aragorn. You may call me Estelle. It's nice to make your acquaintance, and thank you for saving my neck, by the way." Legolas took the offered hand in his own, laughing out loud at the introduction. "It is good to meet you, Aragorn. I am indeed Legolas Greenleaf, and it is my privilege to save your neck." This only caused Aragorn to laugh even harder, until he doubled over in pain from his bruised ribs. "Don't make me laugh, it hurts," he groaned out. Legolas quieted down and let the ranger get his breath back before pressing him for more information. "What were you doing out here? Did you not know that this is an area of war between the dwarves and the orcs?" "Well, I was on my way to Mirkwood, actually, and this seemed the quickest route." "What? Is this your first time out on your own?" Legolas meant the barb as a jest, but his mouth fell open in surprise when Aragorn took the taunt seriously and looked away. When he finally found his tongue again, he blurted out, "It is!" "So what of it?" Aragorn came back a little more defensively than he had meant to. I'm sorry, I meant no disrespect, but truly, did not your father tell you to go south around the area, and if you set out to visit us? The section of the wasteland has been in contention for some time. It is far from safe here." Aragorn's face reddened at being reminded of the lecture his father had given him before he left. When Legolas chuckled at the response, he shot him a withering glance. "Then he did." Legolas nodded knowingly and continued lightly. "So very much like a man, to think he can just go wherever he pleases." It was something that had come out of his mouth so many times he had never thought about it, and saying it to the ranger, who spoke Elvish like a native born, it did not occur to him that it might be taken wrongly. Aragorn switched back to common and replied evenly, "And yet I am a man. Why is it that you hate us so much?" Legolas was taken back. "I did not say I hated you." "No, but it is obvious you hate men." The silence grew uncomfortable. "It is to our own shame, then, that you do." Aragorn let the statement hang between them, deciding to drop the subject altogether. Legolas was lost in his own thoughts and did not answer right away. So preoccupied was the elf that he did not hear the rustling behind him. Aragorn was aware of the intruder only seconds before Legolas was. He saw the fangs and the dark bulk leaping from the underbrush as if in slow motion. Lunging for the elf's quiver, he pulled one of the long silver-bladed knives from its sheath and threw the blade at the airborne creature. "No!" Legolas watched wide-eyed as the ranger grabbed for his knife and threw it towards him. He heard a snarling behind him and turned, instinctively throwing himself to the ground as he saw a dark shape hurling towards him. The blade of his knife sunk deep into the wolf's chest, but the animal's forward momentum was not stopped, and the creature landed on top of the elf, pinning him underneath his bulk. "Legolas!" Aragorn dragged himself to the elf's side and helped push the animal off his chest. He pulled the wounded leg in close and sat up, trying to help Legolas as he got his bearings back again. He was, for the most part, unhurt, but 2 long gashes ran the length of his cheekbone where the wolf's paw had grazed his face. Aragorn brushed his fingers lightly over the deep scratches, looking carefully to see if they needed to be cleansed. Legolas winced at his touch, breathing in sharply, but this time he did not pull away. Leaning over, he pulled the knife from the still-cooling body of the wolf. His senses were on hyper-alert, and he easily leapt into a crouching position, scanning the surrounding forest. The woodland sounds had ceased around them, and an eerie calm fell over the area. Bending back down, he whispered softly in the ranger's ear, "Wolves. They travel with orcs. They are near. We need to leave this place." Aragorn nodded and quietly tried to move to a standing position. Legolas stepped behind him and helped him to stand. His thigh had started to bleed again, and the depth of the wound would not allow him to put pressure on his leg. Soundlessly he collapsed, trying to keep from crying out with the pain. Legolas caught him and lowered him slowly down to the forest floor. His heart was racing. He could smell the orcs. They were near. There wasn't much time left. The sky was almost fully lighted, and they were probably on their way back to whatever hole in the ground they had crawled out of. Finding the elf and the ranger in their path would not sit well with a band of orcs. A wolf cry hung on the wind. It was nearby. "Go," Aragorn whispered to his companion. "Get out of here. They can't catch you. If I hide myself, maybe they'll miss me." He pushed Legolas's hands away from him and tried to drag himself to the undergrowth, but the elf would have nothing of it. Wrapping his arms around the man's waist, he hauled the ranger to his feet. The elf's strength surprised Aragorn as he was quickly righted. "We go together. What do you think Lord Elrond would do to me if he heard that I left his son to a band of orcs?" Legolas smiled wryly at the ranger. "Better they kill me with you than I return to him like that." Aragorn chuckled at the judgment of his adopted father. He was about to respond when the forest around them erupted and a dozen orcs stepped from the trees, encircling them and cutting off all hopes for their escape. "Well, I guess you get your wish, then." Aragorn looked over his shoulder to Legolas and carefully eased himself back down to the ground. The elf slowly lowered the man in his arms and protectively shielded him. Crouching behind Aragorn, Legolas held the ranger against him and crossed his elven-bladed knives over the man's chest, looking each orc in the eye as the enemy judged their latest prey.